Michael Ermler. I'm reside in Detroit for the last 51 years. I'm 73 years old, and my birthplace was Reading, Pennsylvania. I grew up in a mixed working class and lower middle class neighborhood, and that characterized my family as well. I was the upbringing due to the nature of the city, an industrial city right at the bottom of the northeast anthracite films. There was strong labor history and socialist history. Reading had a very active socialist movement and stuff, and my family was deeply involved in it, or my mother's side of the family. So that was definitely part of the upbringing. And in terms of education, I went to 2 colleges, one in Illinois, one in North Carolina. More or less, I just had to agree on them to avoid the draft at the time and stuff. And then I came back to Pennsylvania, was working during the day loading Firestone tires into railroad cars and tractor trailers, and was going to night school and stuff. So that's it with the upbringing. Like my mother's family was really involved, and some members were very key figures in the local both socialist and labor movement. So I knew about it from a young age. My grandfather, who was deeply involved, lived with us, so I had a close relationship with him. I mean, to show you how present it was, the socialists for 3 different terms controlled the city, the county seat, and it also, even though this is more on the light side, for decades it was the manufacture. It was the source of Karl Marx cigars, So there was that, and so grew up deeply influenced by that. I got involved deeply. My socialism evolved over time. I started writing off and subscribing to socialist papers in 9th grade. And socialist and other Marxists mostly, and more attracted to the revolutionary side of stuff. So it led me to eventually, over time, become part of the International Socialists, and then out of that with the Revolutionary Socialist League, that section of us evolved to anarchism. Early on, when I was in junior high and high school, I thought of anarchism as a legitimate part. I was aware of the workers' movement, was interested in it. I didn't absorb, to the degree I was a Marxist, I didn't absorb any of Marx's hostility to anarchism. But the only contact I had, I think in that period, the only thing I read on anarchism was an E.H. Carr biography of Bakunin. So I was never negative or hostile to anarchism. And then the revolutionary socialism, pro-Bolshevik Russian revolutionism was anti-Stalinist, so evolved in the Trotskyist direction. But I was very anti-Stalinist because, okay, the socialist side of the family was my mother's side. My father's side of the family were all recent arrivals in the 20th century, and they had family and histories, relatively close family, which were in contact with it, of course, interrupted by wars and depression and stuff like that, with people in what's now Hungary, what had been Yugoslavia and Romania. So I was very hostile and knew the brutality of the communist regimes in the East Bloc. Well, my most intense political history, was in the RSL for 17 years, and that evolved in the last years to anarchism collectively with key people in the group. Afterwards, I became part of the founding of the Love and Rage Anarchist Federation and was involved through the whole 9 years of that. Was also been involved in other anarchist type projects like or anarchist-adjacent or influenced, as you kind of put it, with the founding of the second wave of anti-racist action in the 90s, and then founding but did not stay with the First of May Anarchist Group Alliance. And so I had a lot of history in the anarchist movement and actions that did various spin-offs over a long stretch, with frustrations and good experiences in all those projects. But also from the 90s and moving into the 2000s as a separate track, I was deeply involved in the 2 years of the Detroit newspaper strike. I was later deeply involved as the Soldiers of Solidarity split off resistance to General Motors spinning off of its Delco division, which engendered mass resistance, particularly in Michigan and Indiana, and the setting up of by UAW rank and file members against the bureaucracy, setting up the Soldiers of Solidarity. And that also led into, because alliances were built to support for the Airline Mechanics Fraternal Association strike against Northwest Airlines and stuff. And so I've always, while being involved in specifically anarchist project, it's paralleled in the same time period with involvement in some of these mass struggles, which were really at different times threatened to go beyond the control of the bureaucracies, had sometimes involved mass defensive violence that would cause most direct action people to feel envious because of the scale of it, that kind of stuff, Well, the class struggle aspect and the fact it originated in the revolutionary workers' movements or the resistance of other sectors to the growing, rise in, inequalities and injustice of capitalism. I've maintained that throughout the history, but I've also developed, and I think it gets neglected by far too many anarchists, the fact about the individual and the worth of the human personality, and people can lose on the left in general, but anarchists are equally guilty of it behind the collective abstractions of class and things like that. People cannot be sensitive to all the personal and unique political things that drive people into political action and are not attuned to it. So in that case, part of that, I come to that part of my own experience, plus reading like philosophers like Berdyaev and stuff like that. And even though I didn't, embrace their religiosity or their specific political things they did in their histories, I've been influenced by not only Berjaya, but others, and I check stuff out. And I also pay a lot of attention. You don't have to be a specifically anarchist or anarcho-syndicalist movements, but all the other rebellions in history, whether it's the various Russian Green formations, the early Zapatistas, not the modern ones, and but I even pay attention to and try and learn from stuff like the late 20s, early 30s Cristero rebellion in some of the provinces of Mexico, whatever. I try to learn from everything and understand the motivations. With the Love and Rage Anarchist Federation, we also had a wing around the publication of Muri Rabia in Mexico, and got involved with the early Zapatista project, and number of our people that were functioning down in Chiapas started pointing out some of the roadblocks and authoritarianism and rule of the authoritarian personality around Subcomandante Marcos and others, and also, it'd be too much to go into to the specifics now, but how it wasn't really challenging capitalism, and also how in its big encuentros it was in the same political organ with Francois Mitterrand from France and his wife and stuff, and it was projecting internationally a very left social democratic bourgeois politic, and it also had in its training and instincts the core of the Zapatistas themselves that originated the project actually grew out of a pro-North Korean movement. Not to be guilty by association, but I think and how they function politically bore the stamp of some of those authoritarian backgrounds. But they had realized for the modern area and with the Indian peoples they were trying to base themselves on, they knew they had to have a kind of anarcho-decentralist look, but it was bound up with a lot of political opportunism and stuff. That's about how it's simplified without a big discussion I could say around it. Having been through it, functioned in it, and generally, and I've had like a lot of positive experiences and met a lot of very interesting individuals and stuff. Overall, I think the whole spectrum of the movement is primitive in its politics, too focused on, if you look at their practice, it almost looks like to them anarchism is just horizontal organizing and direct action, but it's not more deeply political. And it always just tries to act up being the direct action militant wing of the existing movements, but doesn't really develop deep critiques of it. And it's really just a militant version of kind of generic leftism much too often. I'm not trying to insult, each and every person, but I think that's part of the problem. It also is almost totally ignorant of it, and sometimes when you bring it up, hostile to all the stuff about the individual human personality and that kind of stuff. When you bring it up, it's sometimes sort of like offhand and not for. I tell people, all of us have to have a struggle when you're embarking on a revolutionary project to change or reshape society. Yeah, you got to constantly re-examine and kind of kill the commie in your head, because you can develop a lot of coercive and elitist notions without even realizing it. Generally, be involved in popular movements, try and be the revolutionary wing of it, but that's not all done through militancy, and you can engage in militancy that's premature or not well-founded and stuff if you just look at it physically, but also to develop a deeper political revolutionary critique. And another thing is not confine yourself to staking out a thing in just the conventional left-friendly movements, but try to, whether it's through your workplace or community and different projects, try and bring your fuller politics and worldview to people that come out of other political traditions, and not just write off people because they're coming out of a right-winger conservative background or a religious background or another thing. I've always tried to do, like when I mentioned all the stuff like the newspaper strike, the Soldiers of Solidarity, the other mass actions like that, also along with my own work career, like a total of 17 years in the auto plants, another 19 years in one of the country in the world's largest water and sewage systems. I've always brought my full politics into the workplace and dealt with anybody from all kinds of backgrounds, and tried to engage in constant political interaction with them, and for lack of a better term, also fighting for anarchism as a philosophy of struggle in life, which I find a lot of people, and I saw this in the anarchist movement, people when they're doing certain kinds of work, with certain kinds of milieus, they'll act more revolutionary. Then when they're doing workplace work, if they even consider doing it, they adapt, and I don't see their stuff much different than standard leftist trade union reformism. They become very workerist, trade unionist and stuff. And I'm one thing I tell people, the people you spend most of your life with at work or secondarily in your community, you should be having the deepest and most political interactions with them, and not hiding your fuller politics. You got to study. Anybody with sense means you study your enemy or your opponent. You got, a lot of people have real simplistic notions and about what all the different currents on the right or elsewhere are. They don't know all the subcurrents and thoughts. They don't know how diverse and plentiful it can be. And so they just think it's have a simplistic idea, a caricature of one reactionary bloc. And if you don't, you can't divide your enemy, neutralize them, split people off, let alone recruit certain unique groups of people out of that if you don't know what's going on, and taking that on. I've just seen too much in the left, and this includes the anarchist adjacent left. I've just seen too many people be rude to and shun people because they're not quite politically correct. And to me, all politics is addition, and it applies equally well to revolutionary politics. If you remain a very pure movement trying to implement your program, and you remain a minoritarian movement, your only way to power is to be reflexively coercive and develop your own, even if more subterraneanly, authoritarianism. I haven't been able to bring them fully to my viewpoint, but I've neutralized people from the right in my workplace. And now that I've been retired for a number of years, I got people from across the ethnic, religious, and political spectrum calling me up, checking in on me. Has been going on for 6-7 years now, and wanting to, and even though they're not necessarily involved in political movements, they're affected by different ones and are over the scale of stuff, and they're calling and wanting to know what I think about things. And put yourself in a position that people respect what you think.